Weekend is coming up hot. It's a beautiful, beautiful Friday. So let's do yet again another Transformer podcast Patreon listener question. Once again, if you want to be part of the Transformer Slag podcast, support the podcast, let us know we're doing a good job. Join the Patreon, patreon.com/protoman. Check the pinned comment or the description below and join the awesomeness. What does that podcast Patreon get you? What does it get you? What does that money that you work so hard for get you when you join the Patreon? Well, it gets you your name at the end credit scroll at the end of every segment moving forward. It gets you access to the Transformer Slag Discord. We have a Discord. It's pretty cool. It's pretty exclusive. We have a whole bunch of cool stuff on there, some exclusive lore, some news that drops before everywhere else, some cool deals so you could save on your hobby in the Transformer world, and then some. Depending on what tier, you might even get a little gift in the mail, depending on that tier. And of course, the Patreon listener question. We got a Patreon listener question from Trevor, and Trevor wants to know, good evening, Protoman. How are things going? Always love what you do. You talked about play patterns occasionally on the podcast. What play patterns do Transformers follow? Where can I find a list of said play patterns? And do you have a favorite? Trevor, a.k.a. Cardion. So, first, thank you, Trevor, for the question and the kind words. To cover first, also what I want to say is, like, for people that aren't aware, what play patterns are really, not just in Transformers, but I guess in toy lines in general. I think I talked about it briefly with Aaron Archer on the podcast. I could be wrong. I don't know. It just seems like a conversation that's come up many times. Maybe it was a panel at TFCon. I don't remember. Either way, play patterns, what they are is, for the simplest way to put it, it's what toy companies call the intended purpose for a toy. So, to use Transformers, you hand a Transformer toy to a kid, the expected play pattern from a company like Hasbro is they expect the kid to transform the toy or to make the car, in vehicle mode, if it has like rubber wheels, to turn, like to pretend it's a car. It's the intended play form for that toy. If the kid is handed, a Bumblebee in vehicle mode and he doesn't transform it and use it as a robot, and he doesn't roll it across the ground in vehicle mode like a car, he just takes the Bumblebee toy and starts playing catch with it and throwing it across the room, that's not the intended play pattern. And when you really get into the deep of the weeds of it, when you get into play patterns, that's where you almost could call them gimmicks. That's probably the easy term that a lot of people use, because then we're talking like combiner play pattern, where you have 5 robots, and while they each have an individual robot mode and a jet mode, and you could pretend that it's a jet flooshing in the air, or you could pretend it's a robot, it also has the play pattern that the robot could be transformed into a limb and combined. That's a play pattern. Some people could call it a gimmick. And then you have, a whole bunch of other stuff. You have stuff like, battle play patterns, where some toys have, like, I'm reminded more of like other toy lines where you have a certain spot where a character gets hit on the chest and something explodes. There's different kinds of play patterns and concepts that exist within the Transformers ecosystem, and it just keeps going on and on. Like, the concept of headmasters, pretender shells. Again, we call them gimmicks, but in the toy business term, it really is called play patterns and concepts like that. And Transformers has a bunch. I mean, and I don't even want to say that they're unique to Transformers, in the sense that Transformers really has been kind of, while they created in a lot of ways, and I don't want to say they created it, but they definitely made it mainstream, the concept of the puzzle play pattern, which is you take one product and you transform it into another. And I think that's where I talked about it. Maybe it was on TV. I don't remember. Anyways, the point is that, they made that very mainstream, that puzzle play pattern, but they also kind of looked at what was going on around the world with other toy lines and kind of integrated that into their play patterns. A good example is like the micro play pattern, where it's like, hey, here's a toy, but it's smaller. And thus, because it's smaller, you have the more micro kind of play pattern stuff. And that falls into what Micro Machines was doing with Galoob and everything. And then, of course, what Transformers did with Micromasters. When you look at stuff like, the collectability stuff of a play pattern, it's not really about playing with the toy, but collecting them all and having them on display or something. That falls into the trading card world and everything. There's so many intended different play patterns, but it really has to depend with the individual product, because there's the headmaster play pattern where you're intended that you rip off the head of the robot and now it makes a little driver that you put it in there. That's an intended play pattern, but they don't want you to rip the head off of the robot and then attach it to the side of the vehicle or something with crazy glue. That's an unintended play pattern. Unless, of course, it's a Minicon gimmick, and then maybe that was the intended purpose, to kind of just attach it to the side of the vehicle in helicopter mode or something. But that's kind of what it is. Now, when we're talking, does a list exist? I'm pretty sure there must be some kind of list somewhere that someone tried to put together, but because Transformers has been around for so long, I don't think there is a primary list, because not to mention all the different products that exist. When you're talking even, the role play items that existed, like let's say in late Armada, where it's like, oh, you had like a life-size Star Saber, not life-size, but, playable Star Saber sword that was a role-play accessory, or even something like, look at the Laserbeak from Armada, where its play pattern is it's a transformable product. It transforms into a bird, so also the intent is to pretend that it's a bird, so there's that play pattern, which is like I don't know how to explain it. It's like the aspiration play pattern, I think the term is called, where it's like you pretend to be that thing, where it's like you're a bird, squawk, and then of course it's also a camcorder. So the play pattern is also to pretend that you're using a camcorder, and the sounds that come with it and stuff, and the clicking sounds. So there's and the puzzle play pattern, of course, of it being a Transformer toy. So there's the multiple play patterns just across one piece of product, and that's what probably made Transformers such a mega insane popular toy line, especially in 1984, because it was a toy line that had multiple play patterns in a single product. You bought a Hot Wheels back in the day, the intended play pattern was to pretend that you had a little car, and maybe put it on a racetrack if you had those Hot Wheels racetracks and stuff. And then the flip side of it, if you owned like just a robot toy, whether it be like, let's say a Shogun Warrior or something, the Jumbos, it had the play pattern of like the rocket launching and stuff, and pretending that you're Raiden or Daimos or Mazinger Z, but it didn't have a transformation element to it. So it was just the core robot being the play pattern, where Transformers brought 3 play patterns in one, and that was a big deal. Going back to the rest of your question, though, so like you asked, like what play patterns do they follow? All kinds. Transformers, what haven't they really done at this point? They've done practically everything, because they're trying to see what works and what sticks and what doesn't. They've fallen into the play patterns of, even that of tabletop gaming, whether it be the Tactics line with Transformers or the Bot Shots line, where they were kind of doing the Bakugan kind of thing at one point. When you have the Build-A-Block play pattern with something like Creo, what has Transformers not done is the better question, And lastly, what is my favorite play pattern? I think me and Jaws D share the same one here, in that I really like the creative kind of play pattern that exists with the modulators, and then later on, of course, with that of the fossilizers, because both me and Jaws D, we love customizability with stuff. And when you look at, there was a line back in the day called Machine Robo Mugenbein, which kind of was, I don't want to say it was the first to do it with like giant robot stuff, but it was definitely probably the most mainstream. And Machine Robo Mugenbein just had this extra element of customizability with, you could have like your robot mode, you could have your alt mode, but then you could kind of just like throw shit together and really have like this crazy, combined stuff. And some of the Machine Robo Mugenbein combiners I've seen by fans online back in the day, and this is like, I want to say like 2007, 2008, some of them were crazy. Some of them were absolutely nuts, like just huge stuff. And that falls into also, like, I guess probably my love of doing model kits and stuff like that. So it falls into that. And I know Jaws D loves that kind of stuff too. So both of our answers would have been that. And then when you look at like what fossilizers are doing right now and the crazy creative stuff that people have been doing with fossilizers, I love that. I love that aspect of it. It's probably kind of why I also like mini-bot kind of stuff and everything like that, because it creates an ecosystem where then you could create that customizability with the little play sets, and you could create your own little roads, your own little ecosystems and stuff like that. What Cyberverse, and when I mean Cyberverse, I mean the Dark of the Moon Cyberverse line, which was the Legends and Commander scale line, but not the same Commander scale. Man, I hate that Transformers mixes up terminology and property over the many years. Man, that's something that that's my pet peeve, if there's one answer to that question. Dark of the Moon had a subline called Cyberverse, which was their smaller price point stuff that can make play sets and smaller vehicles and everything like that. And they had 2 price points in there: the Legends class, which was the small ones, and then the Commander class, which was the slightly larger Legends class, but not the same as Commander classes as we know it today, and not the same as Cyberverse as we know it today, and not the same as Legends as we know it today. Anyways, getting off topic there. But yeah, I love that kind of customizability, like whatever you would call what fossilizers are doing in the modulators, that kind of play pattern. I love that. I love that, and the traditional Transformer collector doesn't like, parts formers and stuff that comes apart and goes together. I get that. That's totally cool too. But I love that once in a while you have some characters that have that kind of aspect, and then you see some really creative stuff that come out of it. And the more, like, I feel in the future when fossilizers will be much cheaper because they're probably going to be the least in demand characters, and you're just going to find so many of them in the secondary market, there's going to be some crazy stuff that's going to bubble up from it. We're already seeing crazy stuff now. I can't wait to see later on when some guy managed to get, like, I don't know, 50 wing fingers or something, and really just makes this gigantic skeleton of a beast of something. But that's my personal favorite one. I mean, I loved personally, again, the Micromaster concept, the microplay kind of thing. Always, I dig that. And same thing goes with the mini cons. I love that kind of play pattern and attaching it to characters and stuff. The Headmaster concept kind of falls into that microplay pattern, because when I first encountered Headmasters as a kid, it was a friend of mine that I didn't get my very first own Headmaster toy until years later. Chrome Dome was my very first one. But I remember playing with my friends at his house, and he had Hardhead, and I remember just loving the idea that, because, like, God, how old was I at the time? I think I was like 8 or 7 years old. I just remember the whole concept of, like, it's because it's a little micro figure. You could kind of pretend that the bot mode itself could be a play set also. It's all that creativity. And that's what's always fun with the play patterns, is that it encourages creativity and imagination. And that's where it falls into so many different things. The intent that kids are supposed to have with those toys that could unlock imagination and stuff. So it's fun. At the end of the day, it's all about having fun. And I mean, I wish I had a list for you, but it's just because Transformers has really done so much in terms of all the different kinds of play patterns, conversion and microplay and building block play and tabletop play and all kinds of stuff like that, that really it's just more, I just have to really explain what it is, and then you just kind of have to, sit down and, like, go line by line, figure by figure, if something changes kind of differently. Because you could look at 1985 Generation 1, and there's a whole bunch of different kind of play patterns across from it, because, what's intended with, say, Shockwave as a toy is very different than what's intended with, let's say, Omega Supreme. One turns into a gun, one has a light and sound gimmick, one has a robot mode, but the other one is kind of a train track, automated kind of walking toy with battery function. That still has a robot mode and an alt mode. So, and then when you go to the more vanilla traditional stuff like the 85 cars, they just have the puzzle pattern and the car mode and the robot mode, like let's say a smoke screen or an Inferno. So 1985 is already just a huge mix of different play patterns right there. And then, of course, you unlock the combiner element with Devastator and everything. It's such just that 1 year has so much diversity for the Transformer brand, and it's no surprise that I've said this in the past. 1985 was the peak of Generation 1 in terms of its popularity, but also in unlocking its potential as a brand for mass audiences and getting everyone's attention and becoming a piece of pop culture history forever after that moment. So either way, I hope that answers your question in some shape or form. Very deep kind of talk, but it's very interesting. And again, thank you, Trevor, for the question. And again, if you want to be like Trevor, help support the podcast and just submit a Patreon listener question, or just want to let us know that we're doing a decent job and just want to donate something in terms of towards the podcast and everything through Patreon. Again, patreon.com/protoman, or check the pinned comment or the description below and let us know that we're not wasting your time talking about the Optimus Prime.